here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Make sure you hit subscribe below and follow our social media, all our socials at the 3&D ETB and at ETB Network. On tonight's episode, we're taking a look at a few different things that have gone on in the NBA world. Jaylen Brown signed his maximum extension with the Boston Celtics, so we'll go over that. Josh Hart is also nearing an extension with the Knicks once he becomes eligible for it. We'll be going over that. And then, of course, as a lot of NBA fans saw on Twitter and throughout Instagram, Julius Erving stepped in and gave us his top 10 players of all time. A crazy, very interesting list. He didn't rank them, but a very, very weird list. And a lot of NBA fans had some thoughts about it. So we're going to go over that. I'll give you my thoughts and, kind of look at the weird rankings, the old time rankings that he had everybody. But to tip things off, some sad news that kind of got passed around a little bit throughout the NBA world. Bronny James suffered a cardiac arrest when he was practicing at USC this past week. Obviously, Bronny James is an incoming freshman at USC and is one of the more highly sought after players, obviously being LeBron James' son. He suffered cardiac arrest, which was very sudden, and he was in the hospital. He responded back very solidly. He never really, I don't think, really went into a coma or anything like that, which is good. But they're currently running tests. He's been taken out of the hospital. He's back home, which is good. So he's in high spirits. LeBron shared a post on Instagram the other day of him playing the piano. So he's back in good spirits. It's a very shocking and a very kind of makes you wonder a little bit, how he's going to hold up in the college basketball world and, what his future of basketball will look like. Obviously, it's a scary situation. We've been seeing this happen several times over the past few years. Keontae Johnson is another example. When he was at Florida, suffered sudden cardiac arrest during the COVID season, and became eligible to play and was on Kansas State this year and just got drafted by the Oklahoma City Thunder. So players do come back from it, but it is always scary when, a perfectly healthy 18-year-old, drops down while playing basketball, and due to heart issues too. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of tests are run, some more information about that, and, how he plans on going forward. But Bronny, of course, is planning on joining USC this season. He's a big candidate to be a one and done. A lot of people think that can be a lottery pick this upcoming season. He's not nearly the player that LeBron was. He's not nearly the prospect that LeBron was, but they think he could be a serviceable NBA player, a good 3&D type of guy, name of the show. So I'd like to throw that out there. He's a decent shooter. He's very developed on the defensive end. So I think that he could end up putting together a pretty solid NBA career. So that was an interesting one that, kind of makes you wonder how things are going to look. There's been no word if he's back on the basketball court yet. I don't expect he's going to be. He probably is going to take a few weeks off to run some tests, make sure that there's no lingering heart issue or anything, and then he'll jump back into it. But we got some good news about that. The news kind of broke throughout this week that he quickly suffered a cardiac arrest and was rushed to the hospital. A lot of people were wondering if he was going to be all right. He quickly was okay. So, the worries and stuff. Twitter obviously went crazy with all of their different opinions on a variety of different things. But a bottom line is, whatever you think, happened or was the reason why it happened, everything's better now. That's all that matters. He's back home, and hopefully those tests run smoothly, and he'll be able to join USC's team. He'll be able to rejoin USC's team within the coming weeks, and they'll be able to have some type of plan going into the season. So, the heart issues kind of subside. So jumping from that, we got some more NBA news. Obviously, probably the biggest news of this past week, Jaylen Brown signed a 5-year, $304 million extension with the Boston Celtics. This is the richest contract in NBA history. A pretty astounding contract, honestly. And Jaylen Brown is one of the more interesting players to get the to set the record with the largest contract in NBA history. It equates to just under $61 million of average annual value a year. So on average, he'll be making $61 million over the next 5 years. This contract kicks in after this season. So he plays one more season on his current contract. And then this one kicks in for the 2024-25 season, where he'll make $52.4 million. And then the 25-26 year, he'll make 56.6. 26-27, he'll make 60.7. 27-28, he'll make 64.9. And then the final year of this contract, in the 2028-29 season, he will make $69.1 million, which is just under $1 million per game. Whether he plays in them or not, doesn't even matter. We'll see if there's still 82 games by that point too. There's always going to be the talks about, shortening the season, or especially with this new in-season tournament that Adam Silver is planning on bringing in, how that's going to affect things. But Jaylen Brown is setting the record. 5 years, $304 million, by far the richest contract in not only NBA history, but also in the 4 major sports as well. MLS is kind of a different story. I think most sports fans have seen what Messi was able to do over a few weeks ago, joining Miami in the MLS, and the kind of money he's getting paid. That's a completely different story. But the other 4 major North American sports, this is the highest average annual value and the highest, it's not the highest total money, but nearly the highest total money when you factor in how many years it is. So it's only for 5 years. And putting that together, the Boston Celtics, obviously, it's not as big of a cap hit when you give your own player that kind of a contract. So they don't have to, so that, it makes it easier for them to be able to do that. But of course, it hits them pretty deeply. And their team, they've got the majority of the team under contract right now. Their starters are going to probably be Malcolm Brogdon, Derek White, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Al Horford. Marcus Smart, of course, will be on the Memphis Grizzlies this year. So Malcolm Brogdon should jump into the starting point guard role. And then off the bench, you got Kristaps Porzingis. I don't know if he's going to start or come off the bench. They loved Horford last year because of his defense and his veteran presence starting. So off the bench could be Porzingis. Got Robert Williams III too, who has a shot at starting. O'Shea Brissett they signed. Delano Banton they also signed. Luke Cornett has another year. Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard are all under contracts, and their second-round pick this year, Jordan Walsh, all under contract. And so they have 2 spots open on their actual roster and 1 two-way contract open currently. And Justin Champagnie is one guy who was in their camp who hasn't been signed to he hasn't been signed to a fully guaranteed contract, so he's got a shot at making either the two-way or the actual roster. And my guess would be the actual roster, since he's already played on a couple of two-ways. And then the two of the 3 two-way contracts are taken. J.D. Davison, who was a late second-round pick last year and was on a two-way contract the entire year for the Celtics. He'll be in his second year. And Jay Scrubb, they also signed to another two-way contract. And this year, there are 3 two-way contracts rather than 2 two-way contracts on NBA rosters. So that's an important thing to remember. The Knicks, it seems like they signed 4 different guys to compete for those 3 different spots. But the Celtics team is looking pretty solid. There was a lot, obviously, $304 million, a lot of money. There's a lot of people wondering if they would actually give him that, because he just became eligible for that max extension this year. And it's a ton of money. Obviously, he's going to be making a significant more money than Jason Tatum's going to be making, which makes things very interesting. But it tells you what the Celtics think of him as a player. They lost in the NBA Finals a year ago. They lost in the Eastern Conference Finals this past year. So they think that they're right on the cusp of winning a championship. The rest of the NBA would probably say that they are as well. And Jaylen Brown's a big part of that. He's their number 2. He's their second star. And they paid him very, very solidly. And they'll have him under contract through 2029 with that 5-year, $304 million contract, which was insane. And he's the first one. It's going to be crazy to think about who the next one's going to be and what kind of contracts keep rising up, and how normal this is going to pretty much get. $304 million. I mean, the NBA contracts keep going up higher, higher, higher. Now some star players getting paid 60 mil. Absolutely insane. And then another guy who is close to signing a contract extension too. Josh Hart and the Knicks are talking extension. They're not allowed to sign him to a contract extension just yet. He accepted his player option for next season at $12 million. So he's not eligible until Tuesday, which is August 1st, to sign a multi-year extension with the Knicks. But all signs point to him signing that once he becomes eligible for it. News kind of broke this week of what that could look like. People think that the negotiations have started. He could get probably around 4 years, probably up to $75 million, which I think is a pretty fair contract for a player like Josh Hart. He's going to come off the bench. He's going to be a good, reliable piece, and he's just a smart player. And I think that's one of the biggest things that they're looking for in building out their roster. I thought that trade last season was part of the reason why they won a playoff series, and they ended up making it as far as they did this past season, because Josh Hart was a huge piece in that. He's a great defender. He can shoot. He's an all-around smart basketball player. I think that he's as important of a piece as almost anybody was to that second half Knicks team. So they're going to be most likely giving him 4 years, around $75 million with his extension, which is going to be just under $20 million a year. We saw what Dante DiVincenzo got from the Knicks, so he's getting paid right around the same. And both sides seem very likely to agree to an extension before the season starts, and once he becomes eligible on Tuesday. So it'll be interesting to look out for that this week. He'll more than likely sign within the week. Might not be on Tuesday, but he'll probably accept it throughout the week at some point, and puts together the Knicks roster just a little bit more. I mean, Josh Hart's already under contract for this season, but their roster looks like this. Their starters are going to be Jalen Brunson. They got Quentin Grimes, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, and Mitchell Robinson. Same starting five as they had last year. They've got all intention on bringing back. And then off the bench, Dante DiVincenzo becomes their sixth man, most likely. Josh Hart. They also have Isaiah Hardenstein coming back, Emmanuel Quickly, Miles McBride, and Jericho Sims should round out their bench. Evan Fournier is still technically under contract. He's got another year left, and they have every intention on trading him. They're trying to find a trade partner to pick up at least part of that contract. But Fournier, as of right now, technically is still on the Knicks and still taking up a roster spot. But besides that, they have three. And if you want to count Fournier, if you want to count his spots on the bench, they have 4 spots open on their bench. So it seems like that they have every intention to try to sign some more veterans. There's a couple of guys that they were looking after. Isaiah Roby played in their summer league. He's a guy who has a legitimate chance to be one of their forwards off the bench. Gorgie Zhang as well is a guy that they're interested in to be a center off the bench. And a couple of guys from last year too, Daquan Jeffries and Trevor Keels, who were on two-way contracts, got signed to the regular team, got cut, got signed back on two-way contracts, and played the entire season on either the Knicks or the Westchester Knicks. Those two guys have chances of making the actual roster as well, because the 3 two-way contracts are already filled. They signed Nathan Knight this past week, who's a veteran big man from William & Mary. He's played for a couple of different teams. I believe the Charlotte Hornets was his most recent one. He's been on a two-way contract a couple of times. Was on the Timberwolves as well. Jalen Martin, who's a rookie from the G League, is another guy who they signed as an undrafted free agent, and he played for the Summer League this year, and they liked him enough that he's going to be on one of the two-way contracts. And then Dylan Windler was another signee that they just signed this past week. He'll be on a two-way contract as well. He was a former first-round pick by the Cleveland Cavaliers and barely played throughout the past 4 seasons. Throughout the entirety of his rookie deal, he was drafted in the 20s or so. He's had a ton of injury issues. He's a shooting guard out of Belmont. He was drafted in 2019, and he had so many injury issues. But he probably didn't even play a full 82 games in his entire career throughout those 4 seasons. That's how little he saw time, and it wasn't because of his play at all. It was 100% because of his injuries and missing a ton of time. But the Knicks are going to bring him in on a 2-way contract, so he's going to get another chance, another shot at reviving his NBA career, trying to stay healthy. And I think it's a good move for the Knicks too, because Windler's a good shooter. They need some shooters off the bench, I think. With their 4 open roster spots on the bench, they got to look at some shooters. There's not a ton of shooters still available on the free agent market, but if you trade Fournier, maybe you can get like a lower bench type of shooter that can give you some good minutes and be a pretty solid bench player at least. But so that'll be interesting to see. But the Knicks are still filling out their roster. A bunch of bench spots still left. I mean, obviously, there's still a decent amount of free agents still available too. Will Barton is probably the best one still available. Christian Wood still out there. Kelly Oubre, Hamidou Diallo, Garrett Temple, Kendrick Nunn, to name a few. Several others as well. So a bunch of veterans are still out there that they can sign and are looking to at least get invites to some training camps. Some of these guys might pay for the minimum. Some teams that are trying to fill out their roster might sign one of these guys. But the interesting ones, in my opinion, of the free agents that are still available is Will Barton, Christian Wood, and Kelly Oubre, because I thought those were 3 solid guys who played big minutes all the way through last season. I mean, Will Barton kind of bounced around. He ended up finishing the season on the Raptors, and didn't. He was on the Nuggets for the entirety of his career, pretty much, and then got traded to the Wizards throughout the last season, and I believe he got traded at the deadline from the Wizards, and then got released and then signed with the Toronto Raptors at the end of the season. So his career could be coming towards a little bit of an end. He's put together some pretty solid NBA numbers, though, especially for a guy. I believe he was an undrafted player or second-round pick. He was not a high draft pick. And same with Christian Wood, too. Christian Wood has been one of the better big men in the NBA over the past several years. So I think that it's interesting that he's still out there and he's still looking for a contract. And then obviously Kelly Oubre and Hamidou Diallo, all interesting guys. But the Knicks will look out to fill up their roster. But in the meantime, Josh Hart will be getting paid $12 million this upcoming season after accepting the player option, but it intends on signing a 4-year extension when he's able to on Tuesday, August 1st. And jumping over from that, we got some more news in the Damian Lillard saga, the never-ending saga that just keeps on going. Lillard received a memo from the NBA about his trade demands. So ESPN broke some news this past week about the crazy trade demands that have been going on with Damian Lillard and his agent. His agent's been quite clear that he only wants to be traded to the Miami Heat. Lillard's been kind of quiet throughout this, but has only dropped hints on his Instagram about joining the Heat. It seems like that he's really only interested in joining the Heat if he ends up getting traded, and the NBA finally stepped in and told him and his agent that they need to calm down, or they're going to be basically be reprimanded for doing that, because you're not allowed to, especially when you're a player under contract for a specific team, you're not allowed to be as adamant that you're only going to play for a different team. So basically forcing Portland's hand to trade him to Miami or else, basically, or he'll sit out or something like that. So, Lillard did sign the extension with the Trailblazers. He's under contract for the next several years. And, you can't do that. Obviously, you can't do that if, you're under contract. As of right now, he's a Portland Trailblazer, and he's under contract for the next several years for the Portland Trailblazers. So until that changes, he can't go from saying, I'm not playing for the Trailblazers and I'm only playing for the Miami Heat, which is a team that would have to trade a lot for him too. This would be a trade that, and you can argue each way too. Is Lillard kind of ruining the Trailblazers' chance of getting a lot for him, or is he making it better? Because you can look at it from two different ways. You can look at it as the Trailblazers are forced to trade him, so and the Heat know that they're the only option, so they won't demand as much. But then you also can look at it the Trailblazers way, knowing that the Heat are desperate for him, and they could demand too much, and at the very least, they'll just step in and be like, all right, he's under contract, so he's going to have to sit out until you give us what we want for him, if you want that. So you can look at it from either way. We've already gone over on the show the variety of angles that you could look at it and what you might think would be the benefits if it would be the Trailblazers or the Miami Heat. But regardless, it seems like that's kind of pretty much overdone. I think that the Trailblazers respect him enough that they would like to meet his demands, send him to Miami if that's where he really wants to be. But they're also not going to just do that for nothing and just settle for a contract too. I mean, this is like a generational talent that they've had on their team for a while, and he's still in his prime. There's no reason to think that he's not in his prime besides, a few injury issues that he's dealt with throughout the last few seasons. But I mean, besides all of that, he's been good. He's been one of the top players in the NBA. So, they deserve to get a lot for him, and they're not going to settle for just anything. They want to get a lot of draft picks. They want to get a very good NBA player, such as a Tyler Hero or something like that, to kind of replace Lillard as the franchise cornerstone, to kind of keep them competitive too. They don't want to go into, when you have a player like Lillard, you don't want to go into a complete rebuild out of nowhere with just draft picks. You kind of want to get a player that replaces him with the draft picks too. So you have at least one guy who is already an established NBA player, and you're not just gambling on a bunch of draft picks. So NBA stepped in, and Damian Lillard going to have to tone it down a little bit or going to be reprimanded. I don't know what the reprimanding is really going to be. It's going to be like a week fine that really doesn't, make a difference to, his bank account at all, or is it going to be suspension or something like that? If it's probably going to be more heftier, such as a suspension or losing pay for whatever games he gets suspended for and so on. So I think it would be something like that, because if it's just, a money fine, very, very, very good chance that, he kind of just glosses over it and forgets about it. So Lillard received the memo. We'll see if anything changes. We know he wants to go to the Heat, and there hasn't been very much movement on the trade market, at least that we have heard of over the last few weeks. This was kind of like a big deal, like around like the 4th of July. People wondering what they would get for him and who they would get for him. And kind of just like just an interesting overall situation. So jumping from that, we got a little historic player jumping into the news. Dr. J ranked his top 10 all-time players in the NBA. And the list was pretty interesting, to say the least. It was not to the degree that a lot of people would think that it would be. There's a lot of players that were not included that are very interesting ones that are included on pretty much everyone else's boards. And there's a couple of players too that were, I don't think anybody considers even top 50 players of all time that he included, but he's an older player, and he's looking out for guys that he played against and kind of doing that rather than including the newer players. But he ranked his top 10 all time, and it went as follows: Jerry West, in no specific order: Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, Elgin Baylor, Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, Michael Jordan, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Magic Johnson, Karl Malone, and Nate Tiny Archibald were his top 10 players of all time. And the one that stands out is definitely Tiny Archibald. He's a Hall of Famer, great player, played in the 60s and 70s. But top 10 all time. Very few people are going to say that he was that. I think very few people would say that he's even top 50 of all time right now. And then, of course, there's a lot of guys that he left out. Obviously, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Steph Curry, if you want to consider him top 10 all time, Tim Duncan, Shaq, a variety of guys. Larry Bird, he also left out. And really the only guys that he included that played after his time period was Magic, Michael Jordan, and Karl Malone. He obviously played in the 70s and into the 80s. But Jerry West was around his time. Oscar Robertson was around his time. Elgin Baylor was too. Wilt and Bill Russell. So he was showing a lot of love to old-time players, but not including anybody from the 21st century, pretty much. So I thought that was very interesting. A lot of people had a lot of opinions on that. People went crazy on Twitter, especially the LeBron fans, as usual. They go crazy about just about anything. But they went crazy about this because LeBron wasn't, included in this list. It's a very meaningless list, obviously. My thoughts on it, it's more, this is more of like a nothing to talk about. It's not important at all, but it's kind of interesting, we're in July. There's not too much NBA stuff going on. Things will heat up in the upcoming months, which I'm excited about, but there's very few things to even report on, very few things that are going on. So this was kind of an interesting thing that, got a few people mad. Obviously, it's a meaningless list. We've seen a lot of old NBA players giving praise to the guys of their generation rather than the guys of the current generation. Obviously, I don't agree with the list. I came out with my top 50 of all time. I've mentioned it on the show. Never gone over it completely on the show, but in mine, I don't have Nate Archibald in my top 50. I obviously have all the rest because all of the rest were tremendous players, but the only ones who he included that I have in my top 10 are Michael Jordan, who is greatest basketball player of all time, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Magic Johnson, and Will Chamberlain was just on the outside. Same with Bill Russell. They were kind of like on the edge. Well, Bill Russell was on the outside. Will Chamberlain, I had ranked 9 in my top 50. Bill Russell had ranked 11, but he was showing some love to all of the different players of his time, and you can't hate on that. Definitely can't hate on that. He enjoyed his era. He's probably one of the guys who thinks that his era was the toughest era. There's no way to refute that either. It's I thought it was kind of funny too on Twitter how a lot of people were going after Dr. J, kind of saying like, these old heads shouldn't let us know their opinions and stuff. Their opinions really don't matter, blah, blah, blah. And it's like these guys are kind of like the cornerstones of the NBA. They were in the beginning era of the NBA. You can't just act like, you're a 20-something-year-old who, never played basketball, but you liked watching the NBA, and your opinion matters more than an NBA great. I think that's pretty stupid to try to run that kind of an argument, but obviously, everybody's going to have their own opinion. There's no set way that anyone is going to be able to rank any player top 10 all time. Everybody's got their different opinions. Everybody's got the different opinions on who's 1, who's 2, who's 3, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's all just kind of like the beauty of it. And, everybody has their GOAT, and everybody has their, players who were underrated, players who were overrated, blah, blah, blah. And, Dr. J kind of came out with his, and the guys that he thinks are top 10 all time. I just thought it was funny. It's really like a nothing thing to talk about, but it's definitely very interesting to kind of pass along throughout the off season, and everything else that goes on with that. free agency has been held to a stop. The summer league has been over. We're still waiting training camp. There hasn't been any trades going on too. Once the Damian Lillard trade happens, if it happens, that is, I shouldn't say when it happens, but if it happens, that's going to be some big news. But as of right now, things have been on the quieter end. So the Dr. J stuff, pretty interesting to kind of talk about. But that'll do it for another episode of the 3&D. I want to thank everyone for tuning into the Empty the Bench podcast network for another episode. Once again, make sure you like and subscribe to this channel and follow the social at the 3&D ETB. We'll be back next Monday for a longer episode. Not too much news going on right now, so we're shortening it up for you guys. We'll be putting out content all week, though, in case you missed the entire episode. And so make sure you follow us on socials, and you'll be able to see all of that. Hope everyone has a great night, and make sure to like and subscribe to Empty the Bench here on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. Have a good night, everyone.